friends. Welcome back to the unofficial companion podcast to HBO Max's hit show, Industry, with us, the Wall Street Skinny. So for those of you who don't know us, I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
We are two lifelong friends, former investment bankers, and teachers here to give you the skinny on what the show gets right, what it gets wrong, and where all the drama intersects with real life. This is also my favorite day of the week.
Tuesday?
The day that we do Industry, our Industry podcast recording is 100% hands down my favorite day of the week that we have in our little work schedule.
So to give you guys a sense, last week, Jen had 20 pages of notes, and this week she only has 14.
I could have done it in my sleep. What a breeze!
So, because it's going to be a quicker episode, maybe, I do want to spend 2 minutes on two things that we didn't talk about that I actually think are not necessarily important, but like that are in the intro. The first thing, my first reaction to watching the show was I absolutely hate the music. And this is coming from someone who literally has HBO music on my saved Spotify playlist. Again, Game of Thrones. I'm obsessed with White Lotus. I'm obsessed with the Succession songs. And I was so disappointed that they basically picked cheesy 80s like elevator music. By the way, we're millennials, so like we're supposed to like 80s music, and I hate it. So that's my first gripe. And I know, Jen, when you first listened, you were like, it's not that bad. And then now you're like, no, I hate it.
Wasn't that bad. Well, I like electronic music. I was okay with it being electronic. And at first it was giving Stranger Things. I love the Stranger Things soundtrack and the overall vibe. So I was like, oh, okay. They're trying to evoke the 80s, which was kind of like the heyday of the bond market when it first got going. So I was like, I can see where they're going with this. I'm 4 episodes in. I'm sick of it. Redo it. Yeah. Give us a new HBO quality intro with like a map. Give us just so you guys know, when I'm releasing our sales and trading course coming up, I think probably in the spring, we're going to have a map for you guys that is HBO worthy. So just know that we're going to make up for it where HBO has fallen short.
Yeah. But I literally also, because they chose that music, was Googling, like, when is this supposed to have taken place? I actually thought that maybe it was, there's that other show, Tell Me Lies, that's like based in 2007.
I haven't seen that.
And I thought maybe this is supposed to be like a throwback to, because by the way, so much stuff is similar. I mean, you're saying no.
They're 100% like this is 2020. They have like
They do. Yes. I mean, they had in this episode, they literally had like 2020 University Day.
Yes. 2020
and I have a gripe with that, which we're going to get to later. But in the very first episode, it wasn't clear what year it was. And so that was when I was looking up, like, when is this supposed to have taken place? So that was my first thing. The second, I was actually very surprised to see that Lena Dunham directed episode 1. I don't know if she did the rest of them, but it was.
I don't see her listed as the director on the other. Yeah. Again, I've only watched through episode 4. One thing that we are doing is, I know Kristen's moving ahead through the series. I am going episode by episode, week by week, so you guys get my reaction in real time without
not knowing what's going to happen,
foreshadowing, not knowing what's going to happen. And so I think it's good to have both of our perspectives, because I might be like, I think this means this. And if we're both totally clueless, that doesn't help anyone. But hopefully Kristen will have insight.
I'm now in season 3, but it's funny, when we did episode 1, you and I were talking, you're like, I don't think it's part of an American bank. Turns out in the last episode of season 1, like, nope, there is New York. So
there is a New York office, but is it a London-based bank? Is it like Barclays that has a US division, or is it a US-based investment bank that has a London office?
I believe it's a US-based bank with a London office, but I also am not sure. Every time when we do these reviews, I'm watching with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm basically like typing every single sentence that people say. So I wasn't paying as much attention, but it does seem like New York is kind of pulling the strings a little bit. So I believe that New York is the main office and the London is second. But I was shocked because Lena Dunham is a brilliant writer and director. Yes. She directed Girls. She is again, just absolutely brilliant. But back to the first episode, like, it was just so well done, and it captured so many things so well and had so much nuance. And I was just very pleasantly surprised. Like, I don't know why I got this feeling, but I just didn't think that she would direct something that was just so nuanced, and which like makes no sense because she's so smart and so talented.
And Girls,
like, why
is so
shouldn't
nuanced.
she?
Girls
That's true.
It is one of those shows where you're like, I simultaneously adore this show and hate everything about this show. And having that complex experience, I think very few people, by the way, are willing to sit through watching characters they actively don't like and love the show. Right?
Yeah. 100%.
And I think that Girls encapsulated that so incredibly well. I loved Girls artistically, but hate all the characters.
Yeah. I watched Girls, 15, 20 years ago, whenever it came out.
Oh, it's worth a rewatch. It's really worth it. It was very prescient.
Interesting. So I'll have to go back and rewatch that. But it was one of those things where I was like, huh. And it shouldn't have, because I know she's so talented, but it just made me have so much more respect for her because it was just so well done. So anyway, that was all. It was just very interesting that it was directed by her.
Well, and to your point, quite frankly, by contrast, I loathed episode 4 so intensely that had I not had you and the entire chorus of everyone saying, oh my God, season 3 is amazing. Can't wait till you get there. Can't wait till you get there. I would have stopped watching this show and been like, this show sucks after this episode. And we're going to get to all of the different factors that went into me feeling that way. But I did not enjoy this episode.
So I am so excited to get through to season 3. John, watching season 3 feels like there's a number of things that have started to jump the shark a little bit, in the sense that, by the way, they're in season 3, like they're now basically equities traders. They're like prime brokers. We're unclear if Robert's an investment banker, so I won't get into, but like, I do feel like we'll get there. But anyway, so let's talk about this particular episode.
Okay, cool. So we kick this off, and Eric is announcing to everyone on the trading floor that it's payrolls tomorrow. And he says, can we make sure we're not taking lunch off the desk, please? Okay, so we've gotten an indication that payrolls is an important thing. We should really get into why. And actually, this is great timing because we just had a big blowout number last Friday. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what payrolls means in the overall context of the market. So the non-farm payrolls report is arguably the single most important economic data release that we get in the United States every single month. It comes out at 8:30 a.m. New York time, the first Friday of every month. And the headline number is the number of jobs added or lost in the US for the month immediately prior. So we're recording this, today is Tuesday, October 8th. We just got the non-farm payroll report for September on last Friday, October 4th, along with all the revisions to earlier releases. And we call it non-farm payrolls because we're talking about the vast majority of American jobs, with the notable exception of farm employees. There's also a couple of other exceptions, like private household workers and stuff like that. Basically, it's like we exclude all the people who can't file for unemployment insurance. But farm workers are the big exception. And the party line there is like, oh, well, there's seasonal factors, blah, blah, blah. But let's be real, okay? Like, the data is way too unreliable because such a high proportion of farm laborers are undocumented in the sector, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why does this number matter so much? Well, remember, the Federal Reserve, right, the central bank of the United States, has a dual mandate: keeping prices stable and maximizing employment. And we have tons of other data to tell us about GDP growth and inflation, and to tell us all about the price and inflation side of things. And while we do have other employment data releases besides non-farm payrolls, this is the biggest one that everyone globally, including in London, is watching, because it's one of the biggest indicators that the market has when it comes to the future path of monetary policy.
You know what's so funny, just really quickly? I assumed it was non-farm payrolls for London, for the UK, which is like so dumb. But I also didn't realize they care that much about what was coming from the US. Anyway, so this is all interesting to me. I was like, oh, like they have their own little non-farm payrolls and they call it the same thing. And you're like, no, that's not what they do. But,
nope, this is the big bad US. So Eric's saying don't take lunch off the desk. First of all, people don't really do that anyways, okay? He's saying that because A, this is a super important number, and B, because remember, Kristen, London is 5 hours ahead. So 8:30 a.m. New York time is 1:30 p.m. London time.
Also, I'm like, why are they releasing at 1:30? This is all making sense.
There you go. There we
go.
But even so, just to say, don't take lunch off the desk, like friendly reminder, I don't think this captures how seriously people on a trading floor take this number. Just so you know, it was like an international incident when I booked my wedding for the Saturday after a non-farm payrolls report, because it was like a lot of people on Wall Street are either going to have to miss payroll Friday or miss the rehearsal dinner, right? Like, I may or may not have done this deliberately. Jury's still out. Anyways, so what matters with the payroll number is less what the actual headline number is, but more about where it comes relative to the market's expectations. So for the whole month leading up to each release, economists and researchers all over Wall Street are going to be like agonizing over their predictions. And the market is going to move to price in whatever the street consensus is. If the number comes in very different from what that consensus is, you might see a big move in the market in either direction. So we actually saw this last week. Last Friday, we had a textbook knee-jerk reaction to the number. So it's pretty good for illustrative purposes to illustrate what should happen if there's a big surprise in either direction. Just to give you guys some scope, and it's eerie how the numbers tie out to what happens in the episode, just in reverse. So consensus going into the number was that the US was going to add 150,000 jobs. The actual number when it came in was plus 254,000, with the unemployment rate ticking down. I think it was to like a 3-month low, and there were big upward revisions to prior months. That is a super strong upside surprise. So what happened? We should talk about bonds. We should talk about stocks, gold, and the dollar, because those are kind of like the four, if you think about like fixed income currency and commodities, like you got to throw in equities there too, because that's what everyone else thinks of when they think of the markets. But so interest rates sold off very hard. That means rates rose, and they were led by the front end because the market immediately starts revising its expectations for the magnitude and pace of near-term Fed rate cuts. 2-year notes, so 2-year treasury bonds, sold off something like 25 basis points on the day. That's 0.25%. That's a huge move. And the curve bear flattened, meaning that all rates sold off, but 2s sold off more than, say, 10s, because it was more about near-term monetary policy.
Sold off just means like the rate
went
goes
higher.
up. Yeah, the
Correct.
rate goes up, so the price went down. So just for my people who are still, because I
don't think in price ever.
There.
Always just think in rate terms. But yes,
but I still, when I hear you say this, I still do that translation in my head. So I'm totally just like, understood. For people who are like, wait, what does that mean? Again, the rates are going up.
Exactly. Stocks exploded higher. And again, super textbook move, because good news for the economy tends to be good news for stocks. But let's be honest, okay? Stocks pretty much trade up on
no matter what
news these days.
I know.
Like, it would be nothing short of insanity for the stock market to have like a negative knee-jerk response to a print like that. Now, we can all have a philosophical conversation about like, oh, well, if we're having less stimulus in terms of monetary policy, what does that mean for stocks long-term? But like, that's a much bigger question than like, holy shit, we have 100,000 jobs more than we thought. Like, things are going well.
Things are great. Yeah.
Now, gold traded down immediately because tighter monetary policy means fewer cuts, theoretically means less inflation. But gold's kind of wonky right now because there's so many other things going on with gold in the commodity markets. So it was like down, then it was like up and down and up and down and up and down. And it's become less, we talked about correlation last week, it's become less tightly correlated with those conventional thinkings about inflation and knee-jerk reactions. And then lastly, and this is the one that we care most about for today's conversation, the dollar immediately bounced higher. Again, a textbook move and exactly what you'd expect, because tighter monetary policy, meaning fewer cuts, typically means a stronger currency because we're not increasing the money supply. We're not devaluing our currency. We're going to circle back to this again later in the episode because it's so important for our friends at both Pierpoint, or is it Pierpoint or Pierpont now? I forget which was my client and which is the, thank you.
Pierpoint.
Yeah, exactly. And Daria's client, Aubrey, who we know did this cable trade last week, all thanks to Harper. But I do want to make one other point about non-farm payrolls before we keep going. There's always like the textbook reaction, like, okay, what should happen in theory? And then there's what actually happens. The two are not always aligned. Sometimes it's buy the rumor, sell the fact. Or sometimes there's some nuance to the data that the market's going to get really hung up on, like smaller things within the report, like average hourly earnings, or some prior revisions that might steal the spotlight from the headline number. So keep that in mind in terms of thinking about it, because you might get one initial response from the market and then the market might fade it and you might end up in a totally different place by the end of the day.
This all makes sense. And that actually is good foreshadowing.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, we have Eric talking to Harper about her model. Okay, we've got all of a sudden Harper, our amateur economist, who claims to have built her own non-farm payrolls prediction model. She says, and I quote, she's built her own indication model using weekly jobless claims, which is one of the other regular pieces of data that we get, credit card arrears, which is how many people have missed or are late for paying their credit card bill each month, and Google searches for job vacancies. Not sure how you got that data from, like, awesome job, girl. Like, and she says those are all rolling over. So what I took that to mean is that she is calling for a lower number than the street is predicting. Like, I'm not sure whether to be mad or impressed. Gus, Mr. Investment Banker, is like listening to her little speech and she's like, oh, good job, fellow nerd. You know, like, you did it. You came up with a model, right? Like, this is what we would do in investment banking. Just to be clear, there is an entire army of economists doing just this at the bank. So how she would find time to do this when she could barely manage to put together a few slides on Daria's sales credits is mind-boggling. But as far as like how Harper is performing as our little analyst, I will say, like, coming up with an independent view on economic data, I mean, like, okay, you're not getting fired on Riff. Like, you are top tier immediately.
And then I think the other thing with her too is it's going into her birthday. And Eric is also asking about some of the other personal stuff, which is, hey, so I need your transcript. And she's like, oh, okay. And he says he'll look into it. And she's like, no. And he's like, no, it's fine. And he says, you know, you're the right kind of immigrant, right? Because she's obviously American and he thinks she's doing a good job. So he's like, I want to make sure I can get your visa sorted out. You're the right kind of immigrant. You were going to say something.
But like, how do we feel about Eric saying you're the right kind of immigrant?
It's not great, but this is something that is just a reality on the trading floor. Like, people say the thing you're not supposed to all the time and do not have a filter. Like, I could see someone saying that on a trading floor today to somebody else. That's 100%. That was, I like, think, more my reaction was like, yeah, it's like wildly offensive. And at the same time, I just think it's like something that I could see someone saying.
There's a line that Eric says at the very end of this episode about what his old boss said to him. Yeah. And I think this all ties together with that. So just keep this line in mind. I just wanted to flag it as kind of a full circle moment for later.
Yes. They are also hinting at like political leanings of people when Daria makes a comment, if the labor market contrives to give us another 4 years of Trump, I don't know what I'll do. I'm talking about the US political election. So anyway, then someone comes over and gives her a whole bunch of cupcakes or whatever.
Donuts.
Maybe they were donuts. Whatever. Cupcakes, donuts, they all look the same.
And by the way, donuts is like slang for zero and like bad P&L on the trading floor. So it's a little bit of a sight gag. Yeah. It like, do you remember birthdays on the desk, by the way? Like, birthdays on the desk cupcakes. Were always, it was cupcakes. It was like those little baked by Melissa cupcakes that was downstairs in the office. Or sometimes the traders would have their brokers get like burgers for the floor or whatever from like one of the steak houses, and they would be, but it's just so funny. I actually even thought the delivery of the birthday episode was on point, because here's how it would go down. The MD would be like, you know, the VP or the associate would be like, hey, it's Harper's birthday, right? And the MD would be like, oh yeah, here's $50, go get something. And so then you, junior person, are like, cool, just what I wanted, schlepping around Manhattan trying to find some cupcakes or whatever. I mean, that Baked by Melissa store must have done a killing, because it was right downstairs from our office. You never had to put too much thought into it. So it shows like everyone coming over and singing happy birthday to Harper or whatever. And it's the least festive office holiday birthday party, but it's very
accurate. Exactly. Yeah. That's the whole point. And then of course, Clement comes over, and Clement always just makes these strange comments that we have to look up what it means.
So what he actually said was, I can't see a birthday candle without thinking about Robert Herrick. I was an English major and I didn't know the Robert Herrick reference myself. So I had to Google that. I'm glad you read the whole poem. I did not. I was like,
basically, it's called A Poem for Candlemas Eve. And it's a poem about just the changing of the human condition.
You've heard the phrase before in culture. Yeah, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. That's where that comes from, if you've heard it. Again, this is like a 17th century British poet. And all of this is building part of this persona that Clement continues to cultivate of this erudite, like, I know everything. I've partied with all the legends and I'm this scholar, that he's clearly really working hard to cultivate.
Which, again, is going to come back at the end as well.
After her birthday party in the office, they cut to Harper's birthday party where she's hanging out with her quote-unquote friends from the trading floor. Yes. Now, this is the saddest birthday party I've ever seen. So it's Harper, Greg, Robert, and Yasmin trapped in a very claustrophobic-seeming apartment. I think it's Robert's apartment.
I think it's Robert's apartment. Yeah, it's definitely Robert's apartment.
But I don't know where Gus is. Yeah. I didn't see Gus. So that was the only reason I had questioned that. But I don't know who else's apartment it could be unless it's Harper's. But Harper lives with
because Harper lives
Yasmin.
with Yasmin said you weren't in your bed this morning. So it's definitely
So it's definitely Robert's. Okay, so we've solved that mystery. They proceed to consume an extreme amount of alcohol and drugs, some of which I had never seen nor heard of prior to this. And watching the scene that unfolds, I physically felt ill. The air is like smoke filled and I can like smell gross cigarette smoke just looking at it. And just the number of like bottles all over the place. I was just like, ugh.
No, it literally gives you like second degree sick.
So just a quick notes on this scene. So first of all, Greg and Harper are having a like quasi-political conversation after we just had that innuendo on the desk. Mm-hmm. And Greg is going on a diatribe about quote unquote woke capitalism. He says, and I quote, I'm Nike. I pretend to care about Black people. You pretend to hate capitalism and buy my trainers. Trainers are British for sneakers. Nike is Nike, but it's how British people and some other Europeans pronounce it.
Really?
And yes. And to be fair, do you know where the name Nike comes from?
No.
Oh, I don't know why I know this. She was the Greek goddess of wind. Okay. Yeah. So there's a beautiful statue of the goddess Nike with her like robes flowing. Oh. I forget which museum that is. Maybe I assume it's in Athens, but I can't remember. But anyways, the best part about this interaction is Harper doesn't respond to anything about the political nature of that comment. She just comments on his British pronunciation of Nike versus Nike. And this kind of continues Greg's track record of potentially offending Harper, but Harper doesn't care enough about him to actually ever be offended by the content of what he says. Instead, she says, I actually wrote a paper on the moral case for capitalism. And the guys make the inevitable, kind of hilarious joke, that must have been short. And now she's offended. She dead serious is like, no, it was 8,000 words. Yeah. And it just continues to show in Harper's character. She takes her work very seriously. And emotionally, she's remained so bulletproof relative to all these other kind of comings and goings that have happened, especially with respect to topics of race. So I really wanted to call that out. The other thing I wanted to call out was Yasmin starts pouring champagne out of a bottle that she specially decorated with all these pictures of her and Harper. This is something we used to do in our sorority during pickups. So the theme continues of Yasmin desperately wanting this to be a real friendship. She gives her like a hand engraved like calendar. Yeah. Like, and she makes a comment though that I didn't really, it kind of never went anywhere. She said, I know today's hard for you. You must be thinking about your brother, whom we've heard nothing about since episode 2. And I'm not sure what the deal is with him.
Yeah, well, I think it's because
he was her twin.
It's her twin. So they have the same birthday. And we know that her brother basically just ran away one day and she hasn't been seen him or been able to find him.
So can't wait for him to pop out in some season. I'm sure he will.
Yes, but it's because she's a twin.
Of course. Yeah. No, that totally tracks. Yeah. So Yasmin and Robert continue their weird flirtation over some drug that involves the use of a balloon. Don't understand how that works. Don't care to know. Like, no. Whatever. Then Yasmin and Greg finally leave. Knowing it's non-farm payrolls tomorrow, she says nothing good happens after 2 a.m. I'm like, it's 2 a.m. and you're still, now granted, again, the number isn't at 8:30 their time, it's at 1:30 their time. So theoretically they have a little bit of time to like sober up and get their shit together. But I'm already starting to have like slight heart palpitations watching this episode being like, what are they setting up here?
Oh yeah.
And of course, as they get drunker and drunker, just the two of them, Harper and Robert start getting closer. They start dancing. They're wearing silly costumes. Finally, daylight is streaming in through the window. Harper makes a move on Robert and he rejects her, saying basically like, I got to figure out what this thing is going on with Yasmin. And Harper's like, okay, whatever, like blah, 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 blah. Clearly pissed, right? And they go into work. And that's where kind of non-farm payrolls day now actually begins.
Yeah. So this is not exactly.
This is the day from hell.
This is the day from hell. Yeah. So they show up at work and Harper gets a call from someone named Duncan in middle office. And
she has a voicemail. First of all, I didn't even know you could leave a voicemail on those turrets. Like if there are still voicemails waiting for me from 2013 on a turret somewhere, if there was a voicemail function on those, because I actually didn't know there was one.
Oh, funny. So yeah, so this guy Duncan calls her and is basically like, there's some kind of discrepancy between the booking that was made on Aubrey's end at that fund and what they have. And so he's seeing it as like an issue with the notional. And so, Jen, you're going to get into all the details as we get to what actually
we actually don't even know at this point,
but we don't know yet.
Seeing. Yes, he just says there's
something.
There's an irregularity with a trade.
Yes. So Harper is like, well, this is not great. She hangs up. And then Robert comes over to ask if she's going to the drive. And Daria, her manager, is like, you can't represent us in this condition. So she's like, find someone else to take your place. So Harper,
and the drive is like a recruiting event.
Yeah. So normally what happens is like analysts would go back to the school that they went to and go on campus and do like info sessions. Here, for whatever reason, like people are actually coming to the bank, I guess. And there's representatives who are all representing the firm and trying to get seniors in college, for example, to decide to work with them. And so Harper goes up to Yaz and is like, hey, can you basically do this for me? And Yaz is upset because she's like, you weren't in bed this morning. Like, where were you? And obviously she has this thing with Robert. So she assumes that something happened with Robert, which again, we know it didn't because he stopped it, but she's still pissed. And
Harper does nothing to disabuse her of that notion.
Right. And so Yaz is like, fine, I'll do it. But just so you know, I've booked us for spin and I've already paid. So she's like essentially making Harper, like as punishment, go to a spin class, which is hilarious. And then as she walks away, you can see that Yaz is basically reading an article about Maxim, who's that guy who was at Brevin. And it's about how he has just raised a $300 million launch of a new fund. It's a spin out of Brevin. I did what you always do is I screenshotted the thing. And so it says Brevin had just posted their best year in more than a decade. And this fund that they're doing, again, $300 million, is going to be focused on FX derivatives. So Yasmin decides she's going to reach out to this guy, Maxim, for a coffee. So she's trying to get Pierpoint into the whole mix. So
I also want to point out that during the whole exchange with Harper, we have two phenomenal sight gags. We have Eric literally wrapping himself up in a resistance band like you use in a gym while sitting at the desk on a phone with a client. And then you have Kenny listening in and chiming in with his peanut gallery commentary on the interaction between Harper and Yasmin. First doing bicep curls over the arm of his chair and then doing full-on goblet squats in the middle of the aisle. And I cannot tell you how much joy this brought me. He's like grunting and he's like, yes, go to the thing. It'll be a good look. And also I do think we see this, it feels so repetitive to keep pointing it out, but I do want to say that like Harper and Kenny are both making Yasmin feel like she's the lowest man on the totem pole. She's got to go to this stupid recruiting thing. And so she's like, fuck it. I'm going to message Maxim, my little family friend who just opened his own $300 million FX derivatives and emerging market trading fund. See if he wants to meet me for coffee, right? Like, I guess I'll do that since everyone else thinks I'm totally worthless.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So then in the next scene, we see Harper goes into middle office, goes to this guy, Duncan, and he says that there's a discrepancy in the notionals. He's saying they're saying 50 quid. Our firm is saying 50 US dollars. Okay. First of all, sterling and quid, are they just the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Quid is like bucks, right? Like when we call like, if it's like $5, you say 5 quid. This is Yes. So
although a buck is a million in the
yes, but we're talking about like normal currency parlance. But so first of all, huge shout out to the actor who plays Duncan, who played the head dog on one of my favorite shows, Slow Horses. I don't know if you're watching that.
No.
100% add to watch list. It's fantastic. It's British spy stuff and it's Gary Oldman and Kristen Scott Thomas. It's amazing.
Okay.
But anyways, so I also love that I think they did a great job showing how middle office would look so different from the trading floor. Everyone has 2 screens, and it looks more like an office when you think about where office workers work. There is TV in the background with an American accented speaker talking about the markets, and you hear her say that it's 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I just want to flag that timestamp for us as we're going through the life cycle of this day from hell. That is 1 hour before the non-farm payroll report release. And Harper is just now talking to the middle office guy. Mm-hmm. And Duncan says, there's a discrepancy on the notional. He says, graduates have done this before, so I just need to check. Meaning, listen, it's fairly common for first-year analysts to make mistakes on trades. He knows to be alert. And he then says explicitly, did you buy the right currency? You booked 50 quid, which is, again, that nickname for sterling. Allerton are confirming $50. So we now have some resolution on what was slightly ambiguous from the scene where Aubrey at Allerton Capital executed that cable trade from last week. Remember how when we were saying he asked her to give him a price in $50, worth of dollar sterling, which is nicknamed cable, and it's written out GBP USD. Mm-hmm. And we all know that he lifted the offer, that he bought at 1.3230. We were all confused because the trade idea that the firm was going out with and that they had spoken about in the meeting and that was referenced was selling sterling, was going the other way. So I was like, oh my God, did she go the wrong way on this trade? It was really unclear from how he asked. No, he clearly intended to buy. There is no, and we'll get into how we can prove that in just a bit. But okay, we've firmly established now that yes, he did buy and he did intend to buy. But what now the issue is that has arisen, remember when he asked for it, he asked for the price in $50 million US worth of the trade. Mm-hmm. And what Duncan is saying is, Harper, you booked 50 million sterling worth of the trade. Now, sterling is worth more than dollars. So you did too much of the trade. Now, it's not that she sold him too much, right? They're not going to agree to that. But Harper was acting in an agency capacity at the time, like an FX sales trader. We talked about this. So she's not going to the desk, asking them to take risk, doing something like that. She's executing this trade. So if she's going to sell 50 million of this trade, she's got to turn around and buy it back in the market. So she thinks she has sold him 50 million pounds worth of cable. She's then going to turn around and buy 50 million pounds in the market. He only knows buying what probably amounts to, based on where the exchange rate was at the time, 37.8 million pounds worth of this trade. So she is naked long 12.2 million sterling worth of dollar sterling. And when she goes back to her desk to look this up, dollar sterling has gone down, meaning sterling has cheapened against the dollar. So Aubrey's lost money on the trade. That sucks. But she's long an extra $12.2 million on behalf of the firm, and that is losing money too. Oh, okay. On the same page about now what we have on
now I understand.
I had to go through multiple mathematical proofs because I still wasn't 100% clear that he intended to buy and that she hadn't totally gone the wrong way on the trade, Jen, which would have meant not only would she have to, it's not that she's naked long 12.2. I thought he actually intended to sell sterling. So I was like, no, you got to unwind the whole trade. You got to go 50 million in the other direction and then another 50 million on top of that. Right. So anyways, we can walk through how I mathematically prove that. We probably don't need to. I think it's much more important By the way, to continue with how we got there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you guys should have seen the messages that, again, I was getting from Jen that were just what, because again, it's not that clear. They don't spell it out. So Jen had to do these mathematical proofs.
They spell it out if you freeze frame every screen on the thing, which no
normal person does, except for you.
And they never really resolved the issue narratively of why Aubrey went the exact opposite way of the trade that the desk was recommending to him and suggesting to him at the time. They never closed that issue out. And because they did that zoom in on Harper's face when Eric was so surprised that he bought, again, just typical Hollywood tropes. You're like, did he buy? Like, so that's what we were all questioning. Like, the whole trade was to sell. He bought. We have unequivocal proof now that he bought. It's just a question of like how much he bought. Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So that is very helpful though, Jen. I really appreciate that. So Duncan asks her what happened, and she's adamant that she did the right thing. And so she basically is like, it's his fault. I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to the client. So she goes and she calls up Aubrey. And there are so many bad decisions that she makes. And it's so many bad decisions in this episode. And this is the first. So she goes to her desk. She flips over the hourglass. This is again back from the prior episode where Daria had suggested, make sure you talk to them, like have a conversation before you talk shop. So she starts off, she's like, hey, how's your wife's sleep apnea going? And he's like, yeah, it's fine for her. It's really a problem for me, whatever. And she just like, is like pushes the thing away. She's like, all right, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about this trade.
She said, while I have you, that cable ticket we did, middle office is saying that you booked $50. And he goes, well, that's because I did. I felt like I was going to throw up right now. I've watched this scene twice. I had heart palpitations like each time. And Harper says, no, you booked 50 sterling. And she is starting to like visibly sweat. We know she is completely hungover, smells like a brewery. And Aubrey, cool as a cuke, is like, are we seriously having this conversation? We can pull the tapes on the trade, which we spoke about last week. That's exactly what happened to me. Although, like I said last week, again, like given the quoting convention stuff, like I don't know how much this would have, whatever.
Like it actually might have vindicated her a little bit.
Yeah,
sort of,
like
maybe
it
not,
wasn't exactly clear, like, and maybe they would have been like, let's split the difference. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But we now have full confirmation that, by the way, again, this was what he had intended to do, because we all know that sterling has cheapened against the dollar. If, in fact, it was that he'd gone the route, like, he would be more than happy to match her notional amount because he'd be like, sweet, I sold more than I thought, right? I definitely want to match it. So now we know what's going on. Aubrey's like, I don't want to pull the tapes. It would be a first in my 20-year career. Does Daria know that you're calling me? Harper's like, okay, well, like, I guess it's my bad. Could you amend the trade on your end? Like, hey, do me a favor and eat this mistake for me. And Aubrey goes, with the rate where it is, why would I eat that for you? I'm no philanthropist, okay? She keeps trying to wriggle out of it. And he's like, I'm willing to lay this mistake at the feet of your inexperience. But if you push me on this, it will legitimately damage my relationship with your superiors. And then you'll have a real problem.
Yep.
He hangs up on her.
Yep.
So, all right. What is Harper going to do about this? By the way, flashback to her original conversation with Duncan. And she's like, is this a big problem? And Duncan's like, yeah. You need to immediately tell your manager. Not telling him is not acceptable. First of all, the fact that she wasn't sure if this was a big deal or not is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Duncan is 100% correct. And I really want to just hammer this home right now for anybody who's been through the process of interviewing for a job in this industry or trying to understand the level of severity like an issue like this is. Guys, when people are being interviewed for these jobs, they're given all kinds of like brain teasers or like asked to like, oh, tell us about a failure or whatever to see how you react under pressure and to see how you react when things go wrong. This is why, okay? All of these awful scandals in the news about people lying, covering things up, stealing money, et cetera, at banks. This is what people are trying to solve for in hiring. You want someone who's going to tell the truth and immediately own up to a mistake when they make it. And it's like I tell my kids, right? It's like, listen, everybody makes mistakes, but the punishment for making a mistake, it pales in comparison to the punishment you will get if you lie about that mistake. Yeah. Okay?
Well,
if you make a mistake, we can learn from it.
Yeah. But that's the whole thing with this entire thing. She had so many outs and she just kept digging herself deeper. I mean, Duncan was like, this happens. Like, this is okay. And
he was being great.
Yeah. And instead, she's trying to now manipulate the client and the client's like, no. And then again, there's more that comes from it, but it's just like, what are you doing? I mean, again, this is what I'm saying. There's so many bad decisions that she just continues to make along the way. And they all blow up in her face. Like nothing comes from it. The only way she actually gets ahead is by actually being honest. But yeah, we'll get to that. So next thing that happens is Eric asks Rishi, where is the street on NFTs?
Which, by the way, Eric has a goddamn Bloomberg in front of him. You would never ask a trader this less than an hour to go find an unpacking. What's everyone expecting?
Like, yes. So Rishi replies, they're at 250 and again, Pure Point is at 150. So Pure Point expects the numbers to come in weaker than what is currently expected.
Literally the exact mathematical opposite from what happened last week here, which is just eerie.
Yeah. So Greg basically comes up to Harper and brings her a coffee. And this goes back to what you said. He keeps saying inappropriate stuff. He gave her a Japanese whiskey in the prior episode that had a suggestive name. Anyway, he comes over and brings her a cup of coffee saying, strong and black, just like me. And Harper's just like, I can't do this right now. So he walks away rejected. And then she says, do you have anything stronger? So we know that in a prior episode, he apparently followed Seb into the bathroom and offered him acid. He was doing coke earlier. So clearly he's got drugs. I mean, I don't know why all these people are so connected to so many drugs, but he hands her something called modafinil, which
I'm glad you zoomed in because I didn't know what it was. I just moved on my life.
So it's a prescription drug that people prescribe oftentimes for jet lag. So if you're traveling somewhere and you need to be awake, it's for that. It's also for narcolepsy. So it is a prescription.
Do we need this for the LA trip?
I mean, no, people use this. One of my mom's good friends, who's a concierge doctor, he prescribes it to his patients all the time for trips. Yeah, but it's not meant to just be casually used because you didn't sleep all night. And it can have some very bad side effects. So he says, take 2 of them. So
he says take 2 and you'll feel like you're inventing Facebook.
Yes.
So this is the stimulant that's going to break Harper out of her hangover and help her come up with the magical solution of how to solve this total F up on the trade. Yeah, but then she still does nothing about the trade and to your point goes and takes a shower. I'm pulling my hair out at this point because we know, by the way, just mathematically, so we had one full day that was her birthday. We are now 12 hours into the next day. We don't know how many days have passed since the trade was executed, but we know it's at least 36 hours, if not 48, if not more. This trade could be anywhere.
Yes. Yeah. Jen is so
oh my God. Seriously, I'm stressed out just thinking about it now.
Yes. So she randomly showers. So I'm guessing she went to the corporate gym. A lot of times, like I said, they always have showers, so whatever. And then next scene, we see her back down and she calls up Duncan and says, look, the client did book it, but he's lying. And Duncan was like, well, let's pull the tapes. And she's like, well, is there another way? So he says, just let's contain the loss. How much money are we going to lose if you just stop out of this trade now? So she pulls up the screen, sees how much money she would lose. I think at the time it was what? It was like $50,000?
Yeah, so let's just get really specific on this. So Aubrey bought sterling versus dollar at one spot 3230. So that's where Harper theoretically hedged it out by buying it at one spot 3220 to cover the firm's risk. So she sold it to him on the offered side. She probably bought it on the bid side, right? Okay, great.
And you can do that because it's just so liquid. So if you're doing something like what she's doing.
Well, she's the dealer, boom, boom. Right? So she's making the market, right? But yes, she would have done it simultaneously. That's exactly right.
Yeah, the question that I had when I was actually, after we did the whole recording, I was like, but doesn't someone have to be managing the risk? So that's why I was why wouldn't she go to Rishi? Why is she booking this?
Again, we're so far past the point of who should be trading, who shouldn't be doing this. I will die on this hill. This salesperson should not be executing any live risk. Never in a million years. But yes. So we can see on the screen that dollar sterling right now is one spot 31863 at one spot 31895. It has gone down by 40 pips. That's a decent size move. And we backed into the fact based on what the exchange rate, again, that one spot 3230 was where they did the trade of how many sterling it should have been. It should have been 37.8 million sterling instead of 50 million sterling to equate to $50 worth. So Harper is naked long 12.2 million sterling that she has rode down 40 pips. 40 pips times 12.2 million is $50,000, right? So the math all ties out. We've proved it all. Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. So she's looking at the screen and the P&L is kind of ticking up again because these markets are super liquid and move in tiny increments all the time. It's 48,900, 49,900, 51,100 going back and forth between how much she's lost. And Duncan's like, did you do it? Did you close it out? Did you close it out? Am I done? Am I done? Am I done? And she just closes the screen and says, it's all squared away. Does absolutely nothing. And again, this was another opportunity that she had to make it right. $50,000. Let's talk about the order of magnitude of that mistake. I know this sounds crazy to normal human beings like us. A $50,000 hickey at a bank is just not a huge deal when we're talking in the orders of magnitude of these things. That's the kind of money that desks make and lose day in, day out in the normal course of trading. It sucks to lose it for a mistake, especially one made by a salesperson and not the trader who gets paid to take that risk. But again, she could have been like, guys, raise her hand right then and be like, I made a mistake. I'm going to close this out right now. It's a $50,000 loss, but like we see it. We're eating it right now. We're all going to move on. I'm so sorry, Daria. I'm so sorry, Eric. And she should have done it right then and there. But it would still be too late in my mind, but like maybe not a 100% fireable offense if she had done that.
That's exactly. I mean, and by the way, like what she ultimately decides to do, even if it worked out, she should have been fired. Like,
I totally agree.
Covered it up. Like, that was the worst thing you could have done. Like, this is the stupidest thing. So so she looks down, she doesn't book the trade, lies to him, and
Duncan, by the way, is like, phew, like I'm so glad it's done. I was really nervous about the meeting I have with management scheduled for 1:30. Of course, because it's Hollywood and it's a show. His dedicated, like preset time to talk to the managers is at the same time as non-farm payrolls. So we're setting up the stakes, right?
Yes. So then you see that she looks down at a piece of paper. And what I thought was interesting is they have this unemployment data and it's August 2020. And it says, okay, so the August 2020 employment data is 3.6%, which by the way is like kind of the same as what it is now. But also August 2020 was like what? 5 months into COVID, 4 months into COVID. So what I think happened is they had pre-recorded this. Yeah. And then they wanted the dates to line up for when it was going to be released because they do ultimately in season 2 have the COVID thing. Like I literally was doing this myself, right? Like we're doing our course and I know that, I mean, we're doing it at the end of this year. So initially I had like 2023 as my last fiscal year. And I was like, well, I mean, this is going to look dated as soon as it's live. So I need to make everything 2024. But like, this is, again, what they probably did. They were like, we're going to throw in August because it's going to be released around them. Meanwhile, in August 2020, we were all in a pandemic and nobody was in the office. So I thought that was just like an interesting thing.
That's a really good catch. I didn't see that.
So it was just like a minor point. But so anyway, so next scene, they're at this recruiting event where Robert shows up with Yaz. Yaz is like wearing Harper's name tag. And Robert's like, what's going on there? And she's just like, I'm dealing with the fallout from you keeping Harper up so late and making bad decisions. Like, I now have to deal with that. And Yasmin then says, it feels weird to be in a position of power here, to which Robert replies, so what you going to do with it? She like marches over to the grads. But I do think we talked about this with one of my friends from Brown, Anish, last year, one of our early episodes on the big podcast. And when I went back very early in my career, I was a first-year analyst and I was recruiting. And he was like, I literally have flashbacks of you interviewing me, meeting me, Kristen, interviewing him. I asked him a question of like, if you were given $100,000, what would you do with it? And he's like, I'd put it in a startup. And I'm just like, you know what risky that is? Like our clients. Anyway, the point is I'm just sort of acting like an absolute asshole because I just turned from senior in college to first year analyst. And now it's like, you have all the power and you get to do the interviewing and make the decisions. So it was so spot on there because there's this very real transition that does happen, especially when you're the bottom of the totem pole at the bank, but then like you are the top of the totem pole. Like you actually have influence on who gets jobs and who doesn't. So it's just so accurate that they had right there.
Yes. No, I think that's such a great call. The first year analysts thinking they are hot shit when they go back for recruiting. And by the way, it's recruiting like when they've been on the desk for about 6 weeks.
For 6
right?
minutes,
in the fall. Yeah. And you're like, I'm sorry, guys. Like, I don't know if you'll be cool enough to work with me. Yasmin's also trying to suss out, did Robert and Harper actually hook up? Like, she's trying to figure it out because she's super jealous and she's got her little crush on him.
Yes. The whole thing with them is so strange. But anyway, as they're down at this thing, Harper's up vaping and walking along some like balcony. And so Robert sees it and she goes up and he starts talking to her and she confesses to what happened.
Again, everyone has the exact same advice. Robert goes, why don't you just tell Eric? And she says, we've just had 2 of the best P&L days of the year. I can't just wipe it out. Okay, well, hang on. If your best P&L days are plus 25K a piece, your desk sucks. We talked about desk budgets last time. And to be clear, we are not talking about sales credits. We are talking about hard dollar P&L that the trading desk is earning here, okay? We talked about the budgets last time, but we didn't really give you a sense of the size and order of magnitude of these budgets. The budget for each individual desk in fixed income could easily be $50 million, $100 million. Could be more, depending on the product. CPS is basically the combination of, at this point, 4 different desks already, as I've heard, even more beyond that. So putting their budget at $100 million would probably be conservative. It's probably a multiple of that if you want to compare it to something at a bulge bracket bank, but whatever. Let's call it $100 million, okay? To make a $100 million budget, I'm no mathematician, but you need to, if there's 252 business days in a year, right, you need to make an average of something like $400,000 per business day, which is more than 15 times the amazing 25K days these guys are having to make that budget, right? Yeah. True story. I was at one firm and our sales row sat toe to toe with the traders, just like they do here. And we were having, it was like a crazy volatile day. And I sat across from the swaps trader and I knew he was having like an awesome day, right? And he's glowing. And the head of rates at the time was this very intimidating man. And he's going around talking to all the traders and he taps the trader on the shoulder and is like, how'd it go today? And the trader's like, yeah, looks like we're up like, I think like 3 million all in. And the guy completely straight face just goes, well, yeah, every little bit counts, and walks away. Right? Like a $3 million day. He was like, what have you done for me lately? $3 million is not a drop in the bucket, but $25,000 or $50,000 is.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear that she is not doing some massive harm to the desk that isn't part of the normal course of business if she owns up to this mistake. And Robert is rightfully telling her she risks losing her job if she doesn't come clean. This is Robert, by the way. Robert, who's like a total wild party guy who seems totally otherwise incompetent at his job. Like, is like, dude, like, you're really going to fuck up here.
Well, there's a number of things too. Harper makes this comment to him, like, you get to make mistakes, I don't, which I actually disagree with because Robert is like, you are Eric's project. And we see this at the end. And Eric basically sees in Harper this person who started with nothing. And he sees that she has the brains, she has the hunger, and she has what it takes. He wants her to succeed. He wants to help her out. And again, we're going to get to what the conversation that he has at the end with Harper when she ultimately does come clean. But like, I actually disagree the point of like, you get to make mistakes and I don't. I do think that at the time, Harper still knows that she has the transcript issue. So I feel like she probably is like, well, he's potentially looking to my transcript. I have this thing with my visa. If I don't get the visa, I need to go back to the US. So I think there's a little of that there too, that she really doesn't want to move back to New York. And there's like multiple things that have gone wrong. So I think she's just trying to like not get on the wrong side. But
but if you're Robert, how do you interpret that comment of
I interpret it as
she says you have privilege and you can make mistakes. We all know that Robert is getting completely shat on by Gus, who comes from a place of privilege. And Harper saying that to Robert implies to me, well, you're a white male. You therefore have all this privilege. You can make mistakes. I'm a black female. I can't.
I took that the same way.
Robert's like, everyone hates me. I'm lower than everybody else, and yet I somehow have privilege.
Well, and then it's also the class issue. Like he's looked down upon because he's lower class.
Yes,
he came from a lower class background. So we've spoken about this multiple times, how people perceive, how they stack up in like this, whatever, 3-dimensional way of like, this person has this and this person has that. And so it's objectively not true. I think that Harper is safer because she has a boss that really sees something in her and like wants to look out for her. So whereas Robert doesn't have that. He doesn't have a boss that sees him as this mentee. He's just Robert, who's kind of a fuck up. Who's like 100%. Trying to do everything he can to like not be dead on rip.
Clement is starting to warm to Robert a little bit, as we'll see. Yeah. But and we established a little bit of that in the last episode. Yeah. I actually, even if Robert might have taken the privilege comment that way, I don't think Harper means it that way, because whenever she's been confronted with one of these issues about race, whether it's Greg continually putting his foot in his mouth, whether it's the awful comments the girls were making in the first episode, she's usually like, fuck off, I'm great at my job, I don't care. She is not in a good headspace right now. She is... She's like you said.
She stayed up all night. She's like super hungover. She's now
she got rejected by Robert, by the way. So she's got nothing nice to say to him.
Which is also, but that also brings it. She said to him, "Why did you make me stay up so late?" And he's like, "I didn't make you do anything." And then he says, "If you want to talk about last night, let's talk about it. Otherwise, put a pin in it." And she's basically so insulted that he deigned to say, like, I rejected you and you might be upset. And like, even though it's true, there's clearly
I actually really
a lot
liked
of stuff going on there.
I thought Robert was really nice to like help her talk through this problem while she's treating him like this. I really felt for Robert in this scene.
Yeah.
And so as he starts talking it through with her, he's like, well, actually, you technically haven't lost the $50,000 because you haven't locked in the trade because you still haven't done anything.
You haven't crystallized it. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Harper takes this as like so you're saying there's a chance, right?
Yeah.
So like she now conceives of this completely harebrained scheme to ride the trade out because she's so smart. She's got her non-farm payroll model. So she's like, wait a minute. If the headline number is going to surprise more than 100K to the downside, that should mean that dollar collapses because now there's a higher chance of the Fed cutting rates because we have a weak economy, which should mean that the dollar collapses and sterling will rally against it. So the 12.2 million that I'm naked long from failing to hedge this position properly, all of a sudden that's going to be in the money for me. Okay. Yeah. But all right, hang on. Like we all know it could go the completely opposite way and continue to lose money. This is a terrible idea. Her job is not to take this risk. Even if the bottom line, even if it were all worked out great and the firm made money off of it, it is a clear violation of what her job is and what her duty is. We'll get into this further, how little she understands about the implications of this.
Yeah. No, Robert says this is a terrible idea. Like everyone is saying this is a terrible idea and she's just wants none of it. So the next scene we see Gus is sitting there donating to Hari's memorial fund. And we had another flashback actually where I think it was Robert looking at a picture of all the analysts and you see
brochure.
Hari. So there's a little bit of that coming back. So he's there sitting there like going to donate. And Clement is across from Gus because he's technically his MD, like reading his Financial Times. And he's like, this is the first time I've been on the floor since they invaded Iraq or something. He's like, normally I'd have a lunch. He goes, yours is incredibly antisocial to Gus, basically meaning like, you're so antisocial, you're just sitting here, like you don't go to any lunches. And Gus just replies, things slowing down then. And then as he's sitting there, Theo walks over. So again, this is Gus's boyfriend, or not really. Basically, it's not his boyfriend. It's like he's having an affair, more or less, with Theo.
His lover.
Theo has a girlfriend, his lover. And Theo walks over, handing out new research on a bubble in tech, and drops off the report to Clement. Again, ignores Gus, goes and gives it to all these other people. And Gus is just like, what the fuck?
Also, Theo's the shittiest researcher ever. Every single idea he's had, slow down in housing. Or like, oh no, wait, he was against the slow down in housing, so that's not that bad. But he was like, oh, it's going to be a tech bubble. I don't think so, bud. Like,
seriously.
It's 2020, time to buy.
So then Gus basically offers to reach out to Usman, who, if you remember from the prior episode, was Casper's number 2, who they were trying to win over. They went to the gay club. Robert basically did land him and impressed him when Gus decided to get in a Uber or cab and like go to Theo's. So Gus is like, hey, I'll reach out. And Clement says, well, Robert already has a dialogue. So Gus is basically like, well, we can be dual coverage or I can back up Robert. And Clement just goes, I doubt you want to be subordinate to him. So then Gus is just pissed off. Again, now it's like—
Gus is scrambling for some role on this team. Yeah. Clement has one client. He's got 2 analysts supporting this. And all of the available things to do have now gone to Robert. So Gus is like, he's fighting for a shred of dignity. First of all, offering to do dual coverage with Robert, given how much he has talked down to Robert and put him in his place continually throughout this. That's already bad enough in Gus's eyes. Now offering to back Robert up, it's like, oh God, right? Yeah. And Clement calls him out on it. And it's just like, oh, I thought this was beneath you. I thought all this stuff was like, I thought you were so much better than this, aren't you guys?
Yeah. So basically at this point, Gus had enough and marches up to Theo and asks, he's like, let me see the report. Give me the report. And Theo says, grow up, I have a girlfriend, which is not the point. He's basically saying, don't avoid me. At least give me the report you're working on. I am the salesperson sitting here. Like you could at least do the common courtesy of giving me the freaking report. And he literally says, grow up, I have a girlfriend. It's like,
Does Theo get written out of the show soon, please? Or do I have to deal with
He's not in season 2.
Oh,
he's not in season 2. Yeah, don't worry. Okay, so next scene, we're basically back and we see Yaz talking to a group of students saying, I had interviews at Morgan Stanley, Nomura, Barclays, and I can count the number of times I was interviewed by a woman until I got to Peer Point. When she says, it was really important for me to see people like me in positions of responsibility. And so a candidate who, by the way, will become a fixture of season 2, she basically looks at Yaz and is just like, I'm curious why there are no women on the board. And Yaz replies, well, we just hired our first female president, to which this person replies, that's basically a figurehead. And so the girl is essentially like pushing, because I do think there's so much of this where it's like, there's all this PR that banks will try to put out of like, oh, look at all this stuff. And it's like, there's like the party line and then there's the reality. It's a very real problem that all of the major banks like do not have women in positions of power in P&L generating seats. Like we've had that conversation. We had the conversations about problematic female managers. We've had a number of conversations about just women in like higher ranks, but it's clearly a problem here. So girl asks, what is it like being a woman in this environment? To which Yaz replies, not dissimilar to being a man. She says, there's always banter. And so the candidate replies, that basically sounds like a euphemism. And so Yaz is like, well, you have to have a sense of humor. And this woman basically says, well, men have been hiding behind that for years. So Yaz finally says, look, you can sit on the sidelines and comment, or you could try to join us and affect change. And Robert tries to jump in. And as he's trying to support Yasmin's just like, you can come here because it's one of the few workplaces where nobody cares where you're from. There are many potential role models here. You could be one of them. So it's back to this theme of Yasmin back in power, where it was this candidate who's supposed to be looking up to her. Basically everything she says, just like having a comeback for all of it. And then Robert tried to jump in and save her. And she's like, fuck you. Let me handle this on my own. And so she's basically back to being in power. But to me, that scene brought up so many things that I think do ring true, where there's the party line about certain things, and then it's like the actual reality. And
well, look, you have that playing out in the pages of those brochures. So at one point you see Robert flip past the picture of the whole analyst class, and there's a picture of Gus talking to an Asian woman. And Robert's like, this was literally photoshopped. These two have never met or been in the same room at the same time, but they wanted to show a black man talking to an Asian woman. Like, oh, look what we have, right? Rolling them out for marketing purposes, which is just absurd. But honestly, it's something that banks do all the time. You look at any stock photos, right? And it's always like the most diverse group of people high-fiving, right? All looking happy together at work. Everyone's represented.
Although I will say, in fairness, we had a troll who came at us. We had a video we put up from, it was a clip of this, and it was like, what's wrong with this scene from HBO Max's Industry? And someone was like, there's nowhere near that amount of diversity. And it's like, no, there actually is.
Yeah, there is.
There is a ton of diversity. It is on any major bulge bracket bank in these hubs, there is so much diversity, but there's still problems, and there's probably going to be problems for a long time. But it is absolutely the case that there is diversity. But then I do think it's problematic when people get paraded out as
that's exactly
look
right.
at our
that's
diverse
exactly right.
people, and like look at the women. We've just hired a female vice president or female president. You're like, but that's not no one in a position of power. And again, this is still a real issue. So I did like that they spoke to that, and it was so spot on. Like
it's nuanced and it's great. I will say, I'm not sure how accurate it would be that you would have a candidate really coming hard for these people in one of these recruiting sessions about the company's policies.
Definitely not.
I think that there are thoughtful ways to ask those questions and engage in that dialogue to suss out a firm's culture. This was not an example of that. And also, for those of you who haven't listened to our endless hours of content on recruiting, these recruiting sessions are your first interview de facto, right? Those conversations that they're having with the junior people on the desk, all of those hopefuls are like living and dying with every breath, hoping that the analysts and associates remember their names and faces so that when their resume pops up for interviews, they'll be like, oh, that person asked smart questions during the recruiting. If someone was coming at me for my company's policies, I'd be like, yeah, this is a person who thinks we have a terrible culture and was very eager to prove that at all costs. Rather than asking thoughtful questions, this person felt like a media plant, basically, like, no, thank you. I do think it's very important in these recruiting sessions to ask questions that get at what a company's culture is like. That was not the way.
No. Yeah. There's much more tactful ways to do things. I mean, it's the same thing that like we've talked about in every single thing where, again, for Harper as a salesperson, like you can be the smartest person, but if you don't have a relationship with the client, like it's useless. You've got to know how to work within the system, which is what Yaz was saying. You can be right or you can be effective. And it's she's like,
I loved how Yasmin handled that, quite frankly. Yeah. I loved how it wasn't an explicit put down of that woman, but it was what are you hoping to have happen? Are you hoping to not work here? Are you hoping we go out of business because you're at a recruiting session? So what's your end game? If it's, oh, you want more women in power within this firm, then maybe come and join me and let's go work together and effect a change rather than just standing here and being snarky about it.
Yeah. So back at the office now, it's getting later. Well, I guess it's really not because it's still not even 1:30, but it's like later in the day.
It's not 1:30. If the minutes are like ticking by. This is like that scene in Interstellar where like the entire soundtrack, every time like the clock ticks in the soundtrack, it's like a year goes by on Earth or whatever. I am sitting here just
the
like
opposite.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So back at the office, Duncan now comes up to her and is like, you haven't covered the risk. The P&L on that trade is minus 50,000. And Harper's like, well, I'm still working on the client. And Duncan knows that she's full of shit. And so he basically calls her out and he's like, you lied to me. And she's like, no, you misunderstood, despite the fact that no, she actually explicitly said to him, we're done, we're all set. Like,
correct.
So he says, I won't be held responsible. I have to report this. And Harper says, well, can you give me until 1:30? And he says, that would be gross negligence. And by the way, remember, she wants to hold out until 1:30 because she has this theory that the non-farm payrolls is going to miss by a significant amount, which is going to basically turn her trade in the right direction. She goes, well, is it illegal? And he says, no. And then she asks, well, is it unethical? And he's like, that's muddier.
Oh my God. Is it illegal? Okay. Well, it's defrauding the shareholders of a publicly traded company if this is a publicly traded bank, okay, because you're not acting in the fiduciary duty of the firm. It is definitely a violation of the code of company conduct, whatever that is.
Right.
It is an explicitly fireable offense. Okay, so even asking if it's unethical, that's muddier? No, it is straight up
it's
unethical
to
have someone who 100%. Has clearly no business trading messing with this kind of risk. And I know there's all these memes about, are you increasing shareholder value? Okay, you are not adding shareholder value here, okay? This is not what you are doing, Harper. Like, a risk taker could make that judgment call, but not a salesperson, and definitely not a salesperson who has not notified their manager, okay?
Right.
Like, again, she says, so we've established that it's not black and white then. No, we haven't. It's extremely black and white. It's very extremely black and white. I cannot with this, okay? This, like, if you work at a bank and you've ever even thought about doing this, do not do this. Do not be like, oh, I saw it on industry and like, I just fly by the seat of my pants. No.
But the good news is that we see what happens in industry. So like, it's not like this is hopefully a good, no one's going to be like, I'm going to be this like, badass. Like, no, like this blows up in her face. So.
Okay, but it gets worse because then she goes to Duncan.
Yes, this is so bad. Mm-hmm.
I'll pretend you didn't know. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? It doesn't even matter that there is a very well-established audio trail and paper trail on this that's a mile long. It is the principle of protecting the firm and doing right by our clients that matters. And she goes, I like can't even, I feel nauseous just reading this. Let's be practical. It works to your advantage to have me in your debt. I could help you with a move to front office, get you FaceTime with an MD, help you with a lateral move, whatever you need. This is so patronizing, Kristen, and insulting. I seriously wanted to reach through the screen and strangle her. And I think we need to talk about the age-old dynamic between front office and middle and back office.
Yes. All right. Well, that was what I was like. I literally have a thing. Talk about middle and back office. So Jen, I'm going to give you the honors.
Well, no, I mean, let's talk about it. So I would say that one of the most frequently asked questions we get at the Wall Street Skinny is, how do I move from middle or back office to front office? Historically, so first of all, what does that mean? Those are the support roles, right? So again, what he's helping with is reconciling all the moving pieces and parts of the trade to make sure that everything aligns and it gets settled and all the cash flows are handled properly, right? There are massive support teams all over the world. Now, it's funny because at Pierpoint, it's like, oh, I'm just going to walk upstairs to middle office. Actually, in this day and age, most of these operations are not in the same building as front office. If anything, they actually may not even be in the same country. So you may have entire middle and back office support teams in India and other countries from a lot of these banks. Now, when these roles first evolved, the thinking was, okay, well, listen, when you really get to know the ropes and the mechanics of how like all the back ends of these trades work, right? When you say done and hang up the phone, a whole bunch of shit happens. That front office doesn't really know what happens. Like, oh, it just goes off and then it gets done and like everyone does it, right? Yeah, exactly. But there's this whole actual chain that goes into motion. And it used to be, well, listen, maybe you aren't quite qualified yet to be in that big client-facing, risk-taking role close to the P&L. But you could be 1 or 2 steps removed, learn the ropes, and prove yourself, and then use that as inroads into the front office. Unfortunately, nowadays, mobility is a fraction of what it once was. Yeah. So I will say this, when I was Harper or Yasmin or whoever I was, anyone in middle office who took it really seriously, who helped me and had a massive sense of urgency and who was all over our desk and who would come to the trading floor to like hang with us and see what we were doing and all that stuff. We tried to promote those people to front office. Some were hugely successful, by the way, and are still in the business in front office. Some of them were like, I don't want this job. It's way too stressful. I want to like clock in, clock out. I don't want to be like tied to them. I don't want all that stress and responsibility. However, regardless of what you are trying to do, if that is something that might be a goal for you, I will say this, the way to move from middle or back office to front office is not to cover up a lie, because you are the more expendable employee. So in the eyes of the firm, if a head needs to roll, it's going to be yours. Okay. Yeah. Not only that, Duncan's, I mean, I don't know how old this guy is. I don't want to be a judge of age, but he doesn't look like a 22-year-old. Okay.
No, he's probably 40s, between 40 and 60.
Okay, so this is not his first job. It's not like he showed up at middle office yesterday hoping to break in. He has probably built a very big career for himself within middle office. People in middle office and senior roles. He says that. That's exactly
he says that.
Right.
He looks at her incredulously. He says, you want to get me a job? Do you even know how long I've worked here? You're the one facing disciplinary action, but you want to keep insulting me? I'm happy to stay here for a bit longer. And like, it was so wildly condescending. Wildly insulting. And he's like, that's not what I aspire to be. 6 weeks into the job, first year analyst. Are you freaking kidding me? And then as he walks out, Harper screams, just fucking help me. And he's like, first of all, don't talk to me like that here. And then Harper says, please, I'm 4 months. Oh, I guess she's 4 months in. I'm 4 months into my career asking colleague to colleague. He replies, 1:30 at the latest. After this, it becomes our manager's problems. Now, I don't know why he's being nice to her here, but like,
neither do I.
Yeah, he should have just been like, no, I'm dealing with this right now. But
I totally agree. Honestly, that's on Duncan for not being like, sorry,
no.
And like no second chances. And also he is risking his job to allow her to do this because there is a very active paper trail that shows that he knows.
Yeah.
And he didn't escalate it now. So now he's become an accessory to murder, right? To like the
accessory to the trade. But no, it's just, this whole thing is like,
it's funny because Harper, by the way, I liked a lot in the first few episodes. I really liked her. And through the whole trajectory of the last episode and a half, I am souring on her so quickly. This entitled, egotistical, dangerous liar. This is 101 of what you would never do and what you're like literally told day one of training. Don't do this.
She just keeps doing things that like are fireable offenses left and right. And she does have that almost like Mike from Suits quality where she is very smart. She is very good at stuff with the markets and all that. But she's objectively unethical in like every single thing that she's doing. So back at the recruiting event, one of the things that's funny is you see this like random person come up and just start stealing stuff, which is like a very almost like college thing. Yeah, like stealing the swag.
Oh yeah, it's a college thing. Not me here with my Citadel coaster that I've been using for like 2 years that I stole from a drinks event.
Oh yeah, but I feel like it's a different reason for stealing. Like,
not like I actually need this coffee mug to drink out of.
Yeah, that's really more. It's one of those things that we talked about how like we would steal toilet paper from like. Well, that's just me.
You, not we. No, I am not part of that.
You're like I'm not.
I would never steal gross office toilet paper.
Actually, I don't think. Actually, in hindsight, I don't think I stole it from the bank. I think I just stole it from my building in the gym in my building because that was
also easier. Terrible toilet paper. No,
oh no, it's bad.
I need high-end toilet paper.
But still. Okay, so they're back at this again. I don't know why they call it the drive. Basically, it's like a recruiting event. And so Robert looks and he goes, "Were we that cunty?" Like referring to the girl who was being an asshole to Yaz. And she was just like, "This job requires a bit of cuntiness." And then she just says to him, "I don't need you to speak for me." And Robert was like, "I wasn't." And she's like, "Anyone who calls himself a male feminist is usually the villain." And he basically laughs. He's like, "I never made that claim." And next thing we know is this woman runs up, like pushes aside the cunty graduate, whatever, and says, "Lure them young, work them to death, fucking murderers, party of Davos," before basically throwing red paint on Yaz and Robert and pulling the fire alarm, which PS is right about to be 1:30. So Harper's up on the trading floor, freaking the F out because she needs to do this trade. And now someone pulled the fire alarm. So it's
it's hell. 1:10. It's 1:10 p.m. London time, right? So it's 8:10 a.m. New York time. So we got 20 minutes until payroll. And Eric is like, everyone stay put. We don't want to miss any trades around the number. And this used to happen, by the way. So if there was a fire alarm that was usually just a test, we'd often be notified in advance. I mean, like I started on the trading floor 4 years after 9/11. Okay. Yeah. And I will say this, it did get to the point by like 2010, 2011, 2012, where the fire alarm would go off and no one would get up. And I'm sorry if there was not a prior alert that it wasn't a drill. I was out of there and I was going down the stairs. And I will say this, you see some people putting reflective jackets on as they are leaving in this scene. That detail is very, very accurate. Within the trading floor, they ask people to volunteer, or they volunteer you if you are like a strapping male, basically, to be the point person in an emergency. I think my husband was one of these actually, because he's a tall dude, and they were like, everyone will be able to see you. So they have these like reflective jackets, funny. And during the drills, they have to organize people into the stairwells and stuff.
I will say that my husband, he also worked for a hedge fund, and the fund that he was at, it was so funny during COVID, they all had like essentially survival bags under their desks. So you, me, my husband, that we're all 06 graduates. So we had started, again, it was like 4 years after 9/11, or 4.5 years after 9/11. And a lot of the people that we worked with obviously remembered that time because it was a huge fucking deal. And his boss was kind of a prepper too, which I know your husband is kind of a doomsday prepper as well. But yeah, so they all had these doomsday bags. And when COVID happened, my husband went and got some of those bags. So we had masks that we could wear because we were living in New York City.
During the mask shortage early on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, so that's such a good point.
But by like 10 years out, people wouldn't get off the trading floor. People wouldn't move. And you see Harper sitting there. Everyone like gives Eric shit. Finally, he's like, fine, I'll get off the floor. Daria explicitly goes, it's not worth being burned alive for a client. But Harper's like, you don't understand. I literally feel like I'm being burned alive right now. Everything could not be more awful, right? So they go outside. She vapes another vape or whatever. I don't know like what the terms are. And they come back. And she makes it back just in time. It's like 1:29 or something like that.
There's this funny line. Eric basically, as they're walking in, Eric says to Harper, "What are we looking for?" And she goes, "Labor." And he's just like, "Duh!" Like she's just so fixated. So next thing we know, Duncan calls up Harper and says, "I know you lied." He says, "I called up Aubrey." And she goes, "You're middle office. You shouldn't be calling clients."
Which is true. Middle office would not directly call the portfolio manager. It would have to be a very special relationship where he had a pre-existing relationship with the portfolio manager. It would be a middle office to middle office conversation, or it would have to go through like 10 layers of junior people before he ever got Aubrey on the phone.
Yeah. So in response, he's like, "What are you doing?" And she replies, 15 seconds. The report's going to be soft. We're going to be in the clear. And Duncan's like, "You can't trade your way out of this." So NFP, it does miss, right? Just as was expected. The trade goes in her favor.
Well, it comes out at 120K. So it's an even bigger miss than they've been calling for. They've been calling for 100,000 jobs miss. It is a 130,000 jobs miss. Sterling explodes against the dollar, and you start watching the P&L on the trade go less and less negative. Then it gets back to flat, and then it's positive. First of all, the second it's flat, you're like, hallelujah, right? Then it's plus 10K, plus 30K, plus 35K, and you're like, what are you doing, right? And she's super greedy, and she's super cocky, and all of a sudden you start to hear shouting from Eric. And a bunch of hedge funds are coming in to fade the move. Eric's shouting that they're all buying dollars. And so this is exactly what I meant earlier by buy the rumor, sell the fact. And by the way, all this comes back to little Yasmin's trade idea being right of short cable. But anyways, so you might see that big move right off the number, and some people might use that for entry levels into whatever trade they'd been trying to put on. If everyone thinks you should be short sterling against the dollar, that big move right off the payroll report is a great time to put on that trade. So people are probably opportunistically selling, and that tracks with a bunch of hedge funds selling. So this is a classic thing that would happen. And so, of course, Harper, in shock, watches the trade go from positive 35 or even maybe more. I didn't catch every single print, All of a sudden, it completely collapses in the opposite direction, and she goes from up on the trade to down $140,000. Duncan is screaming down the line still for her to execute, and she's like, it's gonna come back. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? At this point, my husband, who's been a trader for a quarter of a century, got up and left the room. And he was like, never ask me to watch this show again. Okay, I can't do it. I'm sorry. This is a Sunday night. I wanted to get a nice peaceful night's sleep. Why are you doing this to me? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was going to happen.
I do think that's the most painful episode, although maybe I'm misremembering. But that's the most painful.
I'm really glad that you and everyone else has talked me through sticking with this show. By the way, this isn't the end of the episode. So finally, she stops out. She stops out on the trade at down $140K. So brilliant Harper, in her attempt to cover up her lie and her hubris, has snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. She has lost the firm $140,000 and she has lied to everyone about it. If it doesn't register now that she should be fired, I think it does finally hit her. Mm-hmm. And of course, the big irony is that she was right about payrolls. So Rishi suddenly yells as she's accepting the enormity of what happened. He goes, Harper, you won. Okay, and this is something that does happen every single payroll Friday. Everyone bets on the non-farm payroll number. Everyone throws their $20 into a pot because people on the trading floor bet on everything, okay? And the person who gets the closest with their guess, and by the way, we're not all building models like Harper. I'm like, yeah, it feels like whatever, finger in the air. She's won $250 or $250
like,
sterling.
Well, you're lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. And it's funny, right? Because in any other context, you're like, wow, 250 quid. This is a great day, right? And thinking about that not even making a dent in the $140,000 she just lost the firm. Yeah. And so we see Harper making a phone call, begging to see someone before the close, but we don't know who that is.
Yes. And so meanwhile, back in in the bathroom, after Robert and Yaz had paint thrown on them, they're now in a bathroom and they're trying to clean up. And of course, Robert's asked, do you fancy a bevy after work? And she's like, I have plans with my boyfriend, so no.
Can he come up with a better line? And he asked that so pathetically. I actually didn't understand that entire interaction with them.
I'm with you. I didn't really either. There's something with them. Will they, won't they? That whole drama and suspense that they're building up. But yeah, it was a little bit strange.
So romance takes a big backseat in this episode relative to the last one.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So then back on the desk, now we hear Theo, who is talking to Clement, and he's like, there's going to be some very happy MDs and some not so happy ones. Lots of people got whiplash. So Gus is basically there again, looking over, being ignored by Theo again. And Greg has this, by the way, a throwaway line, which I loved, which was, do you think the payroll data considers Instagram models? To which, Jen, you and I joked, I think this was a month or two ago, about Ballerina Farm and fact that they were counting for the non-farm, when they were counting non-farm payrolls, we're like, do you think they count Ballerina Farm? Who basically has 9 million followers and it's this whole scandal, but that's another story for another day. So
wait, anyway, I missed the thing about Theo talking about the MDs getting whiplash. What was that in reference to?
Clients who put on trades and they were up and then they were down. Basically what happened to Harper, where she thought she was going to make a bunch of money.
Oh, got it. So Theo was talking about the markets.
Yeah, I assume so. Okay, so then Greg makes this comment. He's like, oh, I have engagement drinks tonight. Maybe if I go to the wedding, they won't invite me, which by the way is such a thing where you have in your 30s,
that phase of life.
Every single freaking weekend is taken up with the wedding. Everyone's getting married. And in the New York City scene, it's funny how different areas of the country are so different. In some places, if you're 20, you're married. Where in New York City, if you're 20 and you're married, you're a child bride. But in New York City, it's this massive wave, usually between the ages of 29 and 35 is the sweet spot for every single person to get married, which is about where Greg is. And Clement makes this comment. He says, there are very few things more common than a wedding. Richard Branson, skiing in France, and airline pajamas. To which Gus finally pipes in, quit ignoring me. So he's like, well, what's wrong with marriage? To which Clement replies, please tell me you're wiser than that. And so Gus basically says as a response, well, it's legal now, so that's an option, essentially confirming that he's gay. So Rishi in the background, we see Rishi then hand Greg money. So clearly, I don't know if they bet on whether he was gay or whether 100%, they bet on whether 100%. He would come out. But
100% they bet on whether he was gay. That's 100%.
Yeah. And the next thing that Greg says to Theo, are you thinking of doing the honorable thing soon, Theo? And Theo's like, well, I mean, I love her, so I guess it's inevitable. Clement says, you're far too young. I went to Jasper Conrad's wedding. Again, I had to look this up. Apparently he's some designer.
Was a famous gay British designer.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I missed that part. But Gus says
Clement knows what's going on between Theo and Gus. That's why he brings up a gay wedding. Not only is it about you getting married, I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think he has sussed out.
Sense.
He knows that Gus is gay now because Gus has said it's an option. But I do think that much of what Clement says is intended as a dig at Gus. Like, I went to this other gay guy's wedding.
And it was fabulous. But he did say, suffice to say, it was a party. I almost thought it was a little bit of like him trying to say, I'm on board with this a little bit, but I also could be completely wrong. And he's just trying to dig at him. And Gus replies, did you go though? Or is that just another part of your life you're lying about? And so everyone, again, it was Rishi, it was Greg, it was Theo. They all turn around like super awkward. And Clement turns around and then snaps his finger. Gus walks up and he says, you ever speak like that to me again, and I'll put you in the ground. So Gus is not doing that well to impress his boss. I will put that mildly.
Gus's relationship is in the shitter. Everything's terrible with Cleo. Clement and Theo together is Cleo. Everything's terrible with Theo. Everything sucks at work. He's not being valued for what his talents are, and he's working for this boss who like openly despises him and resents him and is rewarding Robert. And he's just getting increasingly isolated on the desk. I feel really bad for Gus here, but also Gus isn't doing himself any favors.
Right. So it goes back to what happened in the beginning. He didn't want to be in sales and trading. He didn't want to be a salesperson. You saw how confident he was, and he was good at his job in banking. He should be in banking, and he's not. So he's a fish out of water. He's not where he wants to be. And this is probably not going to end well. So next scene, I didn't really understand this part. It comes up a little later, but basically Robert's in the bathroom with the young candidate. I guess previously when Yasmin and Robert were at the candidate day or whatever it's called, Robert had made a comment that he could sleep with anyone in this room. And Yasmin is like, well, not anyone, basically referring to herself. But so now Robert is in the bathroom now with, again, a guy. It's a men's bathroom. And he's without a shirt. And you see this like guy like washing his hands. And then it cuts to the next scene. And again, but we're going to come back to that. So Harper basically.
But there was the implicate, like it was like, what's happening? Like, why are they in the bathroom together? Yes, he has his shirt off because he was covered in paint.
Yeah.
Right. But like, what's happening here?
Yeah. So anyway, we'll come back to that. Next scene. So Harper goes to see Nicole. So Nicole, if you remember, was the hedge fund manager who essentially assaulted Harper in episode 1.
Nicole is at this excruciatingly painful production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that her niece is putting on.
That's what that was, yes.
And she's suffering through it and doesn't want to be there. And Harper has moved heaven and earth to go meet with Nicole. And we're all thinking, like, why are you meeting with Nicole? So as you mentioned, the last time that we saw Nicole, she made a move on Harper, then executed Harper's trade idea. From the first episode, which was buying high strike payers or buying deep out of the money puts on 10-year US treasuries. And so Harper pitches her a quote unquote really competitive dollar yen option, presumably to fade the strength immediately post payrolls, where quote unquote the rate is locked, but you need to execute it pre-close. I don't even want to start talking about whatever this trade could conceivably be because this makes no sense. Remember, the fixed income markets are over the counter. They don't close, okay? The futures and equities markets open and close. Over-the-counter options and derivative and cash, they don't close, okay?
Right.
So obviously there will be reduced liquidity after the close. I don't know what on earth she could be talking about where the rate is locked, but you have to execute pre-close. Like, this makes no sense. So basically she's just like, do this trade and do it now.
Well, that's the whole thing, right? I assume she says pre-close because that's probably where the desks like P&L, like
it's when they mark their books.
Yes. So it's closed. So she cares that it gets done pre-close because she wants it to like be baked into their desk's P&L. But like, again, from the perspective of Nicole, it makes absolutely no sense.
Which is why she immediately sniffs it out.
Yes. Well, and that's exactly, this is Nicole's verbatim reply. She said, I once had a Lehman saleswoman follow me into the bathroom and try to flog me some MBS. So it's a vanilla currency option that will lose me some money. You either think I'm stupid or you're stupid, and I know you're not stupid.
Wait, hang on. We have to break up this sentence into two completely separate issues.
Okay, fine.
As a former Lehman saleswoman, okay? What they're trying to say here is like, hey, it's rats fleeing a sinking ship trying to sell someone to someone thinking they're the lesser fool. Because mortgage-backed securities were what brought down Lehman Brothers. I'm sorry, but like, no Lehman salesman was like, oh, if you just buy this one mortgage-backed security, that's really going to bail out Lehman, or we're going to trick you into buying this.
So true.
So I'm sorry, this is lazy writing. I get the analogy, but it's just a ridiculous line. Now, the whole thing that she has sussed out very quickly that either Harper thinks she's stupid or this is a stupid thing to pitch in the first place. She gives Harper the graciousness of saying, I know you're not stupid, but she says, and we're talking about FX trades here, so I love the use of the language. The only real currency a salesperson ever has is honesty. Mm-hmm. And that provokes Harper to come clean. Of course, because every single other person has said this. The immediate thing Nicole says is, well, have you told your boss? Yeah. And when Harper says no, she goes, well, that's your only option. Again, this is a problem with a very, very discreet, solvable solution. Yeah. Anyone on the street watching this is thinking the same thing. And Harper then insults her and says, well, you're usually so receptive to my ideas. Meaning, well, I thought you'd fall for my bullshit often enough that you'd probably do it again. Like, Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And Nicole gives her some very good advice. And she says, come clean, you will feel relieved, and you shouldn't put a price on your dignity. Now, okay, shouldn't put a price on your dignity is a very complex thing to say in this situation. It should be,
remember, given that she assaulted her.
Honesty.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's exactly right. But dignity implies something different. I totally agree, Kristen, because to me, that evokes the fact that this is someone who like made a move on her, initiated an inappropriate relationship. So she's basically saying, hey, I'm coming back to, I don't know, like, see if you like kind of still like me.
But then actually the camera cut to like her legs. And I was not sure if Harper was going to try to make a move on her back to basically.
I thought so too.
But then she just gets up and leaves.
But they show Harper's legs like shaking.
Oh,
but that's what I was looking for. I was looking for like a hand touching a leg or something. I
thought that Harper was going to try. Yeah. And then they didn't. She basically just gets up and walks away. So then next scene, you see Harper basically on the phone. She's sobbing. She's saying like, I'm going to fire me. I'm so stupid. I don't know why I thought I could do this. And her mom is on the other line. And her mom, it comes out later, is terrible. But her mom's basically
her mom seems terrible because she left her a voicemail on her birthday at the beginning of the episode being like, looks like your boyfriend broke up with his new girlfriend.
Yes,
like maybe you should go see what's up with that. Like, also, happy birthday to my daughter. Like, what a strange voicemail to leave. So I clocked that, but it was just like, again, I know that they're setting something up with her family and the ex-boyfriend, obviously, but that I don't care about that because I just care about the trades, but whatever.
Same. But yeah, so and the mom's just like, I don't know what you want me to say, which that's the worst thing anyone can ever say. If you're upset about something and you're talking, you just want empathy. It's like, say something that shows that you are at least feeling or understand how I feel, but no. So, okay.
Oh my God, say something. Literally, Nicole, the hedge fund manager, had kinder words for Harper than her own mother does. And think about it. Whenever you have a bad day, even if you're the one who screwed up, your true friends or your family are going to be like, we know this isn't you. This isn't you at your best, right? Like you're not a person who lies. Like you need to snap out of it. Go fix this. Go do the right thing, right? Like
do the right thing.
That's,
You just want the comfort. Yeah. So next scene, Rob comes into a bar and like him and Yasmin are wearing, it says Pierpoint 2020 University Open Day shirts because they had paint thrown on them. So they basically are stuck with these like shitty shirts that are swag shirts. So Yaz is there with Seb and clearly Robert didn't expect him to be there, even though she literally said, I have plans with my boyfriend after work, but that's okay. So as Robert comes up and introduces himself, Seb is like, I didn't know Yaz spoke about me, which by the way, like there's a reason that she spoke about him. And he goes, you have some shit in your hair. And it was from the paint. And later Seb was like, well, I didn't mean it was real shit. And it's like, yeah, we know. It just really shows that he's not that smart.
Ever. Oh my God.
I also
Seb
think
is
they're
just
trying
awful.
To paint him as just being dumb. I think they're trying to make him out just be like objectively not a smart person.
Yes,
so
agreed.
Seb goes to get a pint and Robert sits next to Yaz and basically says, I hooked up with one of my students, meaning again, that scene we saw in the bathroom. And Yaz replies, like, that's the least convincing thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, I actually do think he might have been telling the truth, although we don't know.
But
I don't know.
All of a sudden, we've gone from Robert, who I was like on track to like all episode, being in this very clear position of inappropriate power wielding over one of these investment banking hopefuls. If he did hook up with really that recruit in that bathroom, that is so messed up.
Yeah. We talked about power dynamics in the last episode. It's one thing to have a relationship with a peer of yours, to have a relationship with a hopeful. Absolutely not.
Oh my God. So I was like, Robert, of all of the things to use as a pawn in your like weird games with Yasmin, I was following all the way along. I was even willing to overlook the weird balloon drugs. And now I'm like, Robert, no.
I will say, I don't, that was the thing. I went back and forth as to whether I believed it or not. Like, I don't know why he would make
they made it very ambiguous because they had that quick cut scene where they're both looking at each other in the bathroom. But I'd also look at someone in the bathroom if they were shirtless and be like, what happened to you?
What is wrong? Yeah, seriously. So it's hard to know, or if it was literally he concocted it. If you're making up a lie, it's easier to make a lie based on.
I think we're not meant to know whether it's a lie or not.
Yeah.
I think it's likely a lie, but even so, it's messed up. If it's messed up if he did, it's also messed up to lie about.
Yeah, it's just weird. So then, toys with Robert. She takes off her underwear. She's like, I'm going to give this to you. I want you to put this on your head and take a picture and send it to me, because she just continues to toy with him. This is how she is exerting power.
She goes, because that's all you're good for.
But this is how she's exerting power over one small little area of her life when all these other things are not working out the way that she wants them to.
At the end of that scene, they do show Robert and Gus together at the bar, like having a laugh.
That was
true. Like they're the couple that I'm really rooting for.
Yes.
I really hope that their friendship stays like
they're
intact.
Laughing because they see that Asian woman that he was photoshopped together, and they were like, wave hi.
No, but it's just like a really cute moment between the two of them. And I was like, they're like Joey and Chandler.
I know. Oh, well, I do think they're, to your point, the best couple.
They're not a couple. I'm rooting for Robert and Gus.
Yeah, they have a good friendship. Okay, so then now we are back at the desk. It's the end of the day. People are leaving. And Harper finally decides she's going to come clean to Eric. She's got no more aces up her sleeve. She has hit rock bottom. And so she says, can we go talk somewhere private? Finally making good decisions. And so they go outside. It's like downpouring. They both light up a cigarette.
Finally, the first time we see rain in London, by the way.
I know.
This is the first time.
Yep. So Harper says, you've been so fair to me, so many opportunities you've given me. And Eric is like, if I wanted a story, I'd read Moby Dick. What's up? Cut to the chase. So Harper comes clean. She's like, I misbooked a trade, down $140,000. And Eric doesn't really react. He's just sitting there smoking more. And he goes, so I called your college today, which is like the worst thing she could hear. He's like, we needed a hard copy of your credentials for the visa. And he then says, you realize this makes you the most underqualified person I've ever hired. So essentially a sign that he doesn't care. He's not saying that I've ever fired. He's not saying you're gone. He's just like, you're the most underqualified person I've ever hired. And then he goes back and he starts telling the story, which you had alluded to before.
Yeah, so he says, when I first got hired at Solomon, my old boss, who apparently looked like Newman from Seinfeld, except a linebacker.
Yeah.
And by the way, that body type is 100% the guy who would have hired him at Solomon. If you guys have ever read Liar's Poker and heard how some of these guys are described, this is spot on accurate. But so he said, my old boss used to say, if reincarnation was real, I'd want to come back as the president or the Pope or a 400 baseball hitter. But now I want to come back as the bond market because it intimidates everybody. Now, I think this is kind of a terrible line, but I get it, right? And he says, people like us, born at the bottom, where would you put our percentage chance of ever making that top quintile? And he comes up with the number 3%. And he says, that's intimidating. We intimidate people here because hunger is not a birthright. Now, that is a great line. Yeah. He says, your qualifications don't have to be a problem for you because they don't have to be a problem for me. So you're exactly right. Eric is telling Harper that he sees something in her that he sees in himself and identifies so closely with her. Harper does not deserve him, okay? Like zero consequences. And so she goes, okay, but what was the actual final P&L of the day? And he says, it was up 200K. And she's like, no. Oh, we lost 140K in the trade. He's like, yeah, but Nicole, the hedge fund manager from Malin Mercer, came in and did that trade you asked her to do. And he says, how did you get her to do that trade?
He says, it's a hell of a spread she ate. What did you do? Yeah.
Well, and just think about it. Assuming there were no other trades done, which is also ridiculous because it's non-farm payroll and there'll be a ton of other trades. But we've got a swing from down $140,000 to up 200K. So theoretically, she paid $340,000 in bid offer that they locked in and captured as P&L. as a gift, basically doing a trade that she didn't want to do. And he says, like, how the hell did you get her to do this? And Harper says, I went to watch her niece perform Shakespeare. And Eric says, you just coined jargon for client service. So what he means is, oh, wow, that is a ridiculous thing to do. Like, go watch someone's niece perform Shakespeare on a payroll Friday, right? Like, whatever. Like, you did this excruciating thing in the name of getting the client to trade with you. And he says, I would never have known. Yes, you would have. Because where is my beloved rule-following Duncan, who had his meeting with the managers, who would have told everybody, this is what happened, because Duncan has to CYA, okay? Duncan has to be like, guys, here's the whole audit trail of everything that went down, and you guys are down 140K, despite my best efforts to keep this catastrophe from unfolding. So, like, okay, you definitely would have known. So he says, there are 2 times to tell me when you've fucked up. The moment it's fucked, or the moment it's unfucked. And that is exactly right. And Eric says, listen, my boss knew he could trust me from day one, and so I trusted him. They had this mutual trust, and that's great. And that's how it should be. And he's telling Harper that he wants that relationship with her. And he's saying, we're in bed together now because I know you aren't qualified for this job, but I'm going to let that slide. You got to make me trust you. I'm being trusted with your deepest, darkest secrets here, right? Like, you got to have that same trust in me. And again, that's great. That's how it should be. Harper has proven she can't be trusted. So, like, I don't know why we're giving her all these passes, but whatever.
Well, he does say one more thing. Like, he basically, he does say also, he says he wasn't big on compliments. And I'm bringing this up because this person is going to come back again in a later season.
Oh, we get to meet his boss?
No, but there's just more to it. So,
more. Okay, got it.
Yeah. He does say he wasn't big on compliments, but I heard him compliment me once. And Harper says, well, what did he say? And Eric replies, and I quote, so he said, that little chink's a born salesman, which is a racist, anti-Asian slur, but it's pointing out that this is the compliment that this guy gave him. He basically, like, insults him and throws this slur at him. Well, also, it's like, but he says he's a born salesman. So anyway, this is going to come up later. So,
well, Eric is really speaking to the fact, like, hey, listen, this backhanded compliment, this is, I know that I've got it. And I've got that hunger and I've got that drive. And now I'm part of this top quintile and no one can touch me.
Well, and the other thing I do want to point out is the relationship with Eric and Harper. I really do love it. We've seen Eric has some questionable ethics. Everyone in the show has questionable ethics, but I do really believe that he cares about Harper because he sees something in her. But I don't know why he would even think to trust her after what she just did. And it's one thing after the next where it's bad decision, bad decision, bad decision. But anyway, so we can do who are we bullish on and who are we bearish on. I mean,
and again, I'm very heartened by the fact that everyone tells me that this is one of the worst episodes. The early episodes have all been amazing. So this was the first episode where I was like, I can't do this anymore. And maybe it was just particularly excruciating given I know the order of magnitude of how bad this was and how they just used it as a plot point. But all it did was make me totally despise Harper. So I am bearish on Harper after this episode. And I am a perma-bear on Theo.
Yes. I mean, I guess I'm just going to say bullish on Eric after this episode because I liked how he handled the thing. Even though actually I think he probably handled it bad. I think he probably should have fired her, but I still think he cares about her. And so you see that.
Totally. And I do have a glimmer of hope for, I don't know why, it was just that one little laughing interaction between Gus and Robert at the bar. I really have hope for their friendship and I'm bullish on their friendship. I hope they can mend fences after initially competing for Clement's limited affections, especially because Clement just seems to be increasingly emerging as someone who can't really be trusted. But this episode was really hard for me, guys. And I'm glad it's over and I really hope we get to move on. I will be watching. So I watched all 4 of the first episodes twice. So when we join you guys next week, I will be watching episode 5 and reacting in absolute real time. And Kristen has well, you'll probably have the perspective having finished the show by then.
Probably. Yeah. My husband and I think we're on episode 4 of season 3.
And I don't think I'll ever be able to convince my husband to watch the show with me again.
John is like, this show is starting to jump the shark into seasons 3, but they still get so much right that there's also the stuff they get wrong is like fun to talk about. So I don't know. I'm still having fun. And thank you guys for listening and being here with us. There is a small chance next week we will be off. We're going to be at the Case Conference in Beverly Hills, which is going to be really exciting. But it does also mean that there is less of a chance that we'll record. So we're going to try. We're going to try to get it out. Hopefully, again, we have our baby podcast. I don't want to like miss a week so soon. But thank you guys, like I said, for being here. And if you can, it would mean so much to us if you would leave us a written 5-star review. As we've said, this is a baby podcast. Any review really helps us in letting people find the show and helping us grow in the rankings. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.